My new book, Awake, Observe, Shape, Transform, is now available on Amazon, along with the 90-day transformation journal. You'll find a link to these things in the episode description. Also, if you'd like to support this work, there are $10, $15, and $20 Patreon tiers with no locked content, just a way to say I value this. You can also visit the site and check out the growing merch store, shirts, tanks, hats, and learn about one-on-one sessions with me by clicking the About button. And don't forget, the YouTube page has the podcast and binaural beats for meditation, rest, and sleep. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Welcome to the Infinite Spark of Being podcast. My name is Keith Welsh, and today we are going to strip away religion and look directly at the machinery underneath it. Words like prayer, worship, faith, mantra, devotion have all accumulated centuries of cultural and religious baggage. As a result, many people dismiss them before ever understanding what these things actually do or how they function. So today we're not interested in belief, we're interested in function. Because if we can understand how these mechanisms operate within the mind, we'll begin to notice something. We'll notice that we've been using them every day without even realizing it. We'll also explore why understanding these mechanisms may be one of the most important steps in recognizing how control systems or systems of influence and what the Gnostic Christians called archonic forces can redirect and capture human consciousness. So, here we go. Whoever controls your attention controls your reality. I'd like to go back to something that I mentioned in the previous episode 233. It's a tactic, right? And the tactic is to take something serious, something meaningful, and delegitimize it by wrapping it in something foolish or silly or buffoonish. An example that I used was the anti-Vietnam War movement being wrapped up in the hippie flower power movement, which was a completely inorganic psyop. This way, if you were somebody who was a serious person and you were against the Vietnam War, you were easily dismissed by saying, oh, what are you, one of these hippies? You're going to paint flowers on your face now? That would encourage you to keep your mouth shut. I believe the same thing is happening with our innate divine ability. Our ability to manifest or reveal a reality to ourselves that is more favorable. And we would do that by wrapping religion, right? Organized religion, whatever you would call it, around something like prayer or mantra recitation, which we'll get into. Like I said, we're going to talk about the functionality of these things, right? I mean, for instance, there is something important about being able to direct your mind to find a way, a possibility to make something real for you that's important, and to do that through language and repetition. But if you said, oh, I'm using a mantra daily, you could easily be shut down. Like, oh, what are you chanting in some dead language? Right? Or prayer, which functionally is just a continuing inner dialogue that is relatively positive. And, oh, what are you talking to your imaginary friend? So you see these abilities that we have to create a reality that is better for us get hidden. Now, did the power structure create these systems to deter us from getting involved or to make them seem impossible or outside of us or whatever? I don't know. That's up for discussion. But that's something that I wanted to place in your consciousness. Again, remind you of it from the previous episode, because I do think that it is important. So to move along, I think it's funny to me when people tell me that they aren't religious or that they struggle with faith and belief, especially belief in God. And I understand, believe me, I understand. On some level, it really amounts to a belief in an imaginary friend. And I mean, I, for one, have a belief system, and I too understand that it is simply a way of understanding the world that feels sensible and comfortable for me, which is basically me finding a hat to put on the mystery, some sort of method of dressing it up in a way that's more palatable to me. But either way, humans, all human beings, are already deeply religious. And to clarify that point, the word religious comes from the Latin religio, I don't know how you pronounce it, which means reverent or devoted. It traces back to religio, a word describing careful attention or sacred obligation, or what one consistently observes. Now, a lot of people have heard that religion means to bind back or to bind to, but most linguists believe its older meaning is closer to meaning something like to carefully attend to or to repeatedly consider. In other words, being religious is less about belonging to a particular institution and more about what you continually give your attention, devotion, or energy to. By that definition, I mean, every one of us is already practicing a kind of religion. We're already worshiping something. And just to finish the point, the word yoga comes from the Sanskrit root yug, Y-U-J, which just means to yoke, to join, or to unite. It originally referred to bringing separate things into alignment, much like yoking two oxen together. In Sanātana Dharma, yoga is the process of uniting the individual mind with its highest nature. So it's not about physical postures. It's about directing attention, cultivating discipline, bringing one's life into harmony, into alignment, into unification with what is true. In that sense, yoga asks the same question as religion. The question is, what are you joining yourself to? What are you binding yourself to? You as a human are not religious because you go to church, or because you meditate for that matter, or because you identify with a particular faith. You are religious because your mind is already engaged in practices that religion just gave a name to. Remember, the mind doesn't care about truth, doesn't care about right or wrong, it cares about repetition. 3 of our 6 cognitive faculties are language, perception, and memory. So, what is a prayer, mantra, or affirmation? It's language, repeated language, hopefully repeated, right? Or, unfortunately, it's repeated. You describe the world the same way every single day. You describe yourself and others in the same way every single day. In fact, you put your faith in it every day, no matter what. So in my opinion, you are religious. I'm not trying to be cute, but every day you pray and chant your mantra. This is fucked. This is fucked. This is hard. This is hard. Life is hard. Life is hard. Life is hard. The world's a trash fire. The world's a trash fire, right? And every day you place your faith somewhere. Every day you worship. And for some of you, that statement sounds silly. I accept that. Or maybe a bit out of reach, right? You may not believe in God at all. You may never have set foot inside of a temple or a church. In fact, you may reject organized religion altogether because you're spiritual and not religious. But today, again, I'm not interested in religion. Again, I'm interested in function. If we remove the robes, the rituals, the language, the symbols, centuries of cultural tradition, remove the religious trauma or your desire as an adult to rebel against your upbringing, what's left? The mind, human consciousness, that's what's left. So today I want to examine something that Carl Jung seemed to understand very well. It was that human beings appear to possess an innate religious instinct. Now, whether we call it devotion, meaning-making, transcendence, or maybe that we're looking for the sacred, there seems to be something within every human that naturally orients itself towards something that it perceives, that the human perceives as greater than itself. Or let's say something that the human perceives as above it or better than it, right? The mistake we always make is assuming that if someone rejects religion, that they've somehow escaped the urge to devote, which I find hilarious because they haven't. They've just redirected it. So the question is not, what religion are you? The question is, how do you worship? To what are you a devotee? What are you devoted to? Because whether you like it or not, we are wired for devotion. It's almost a bodily function. You know, something already sits at the center of your psychological world. Something already has your full attention. It has your emotions, your energy, your time. You trust it. In fact, you probably already sacrificed things to it. And within a religious framework, that's called worship. Psychologically, I guess you could call it hierarchy. And a neuroscientist might say it's attentional prioritization. Within addiction sciences, it would be described as reinforcement learning. Different words, same phenomena, same function. This episode is not about convincing you to take up a particular religion, nor is it about persuading you that the Gnostic ideas about archons are literally true. Instead, I want to look at something much more practical. If consciousness naturally performs these functions, devotion, worship, undivided attention, whatever we're calling it, who or what is directing our consciousness? Is it you? Is it us? Is it the marketing department? Is it a super PAC? Do you really think that you've decided all of these things, but for yourself? Before we continue, you need to understand something. We discussed this in the episode about the mind. Thought is the result of a neural process. A neural process that you do not control. In other words, we do not pick our thoughts. Along with that, our nervous system is reacting to those thoughts. So not only are you not picking your thoughts, but you're not picking your emotions. Our mind learns to think a certain way based on the actions taken. So when we're looking at change, we have to look at it from the perspective of training the mind and training the body to produce different experiences. For more on that, check out my episode titled Understanding the Mind. I believe it's the one right before 233, so I guess it's 232. Remember, the mind does not care about truth. It cares about repetition. So what is the function of ritual? What is the function of mantra recitation? Repetition. That's its function. So as we begin to look at all of this, we must know that every mind already has a liturgy. And the word liturgy comes from the Greek, I'm going to screw this up, liturgia, I think, meaning public service or the work of the people. So over time, it came to describe the structured prayers, readings, rituals, and repeated practices used in religious worship. But if we look beyond the religious lens, liturgy is simply a pattern of repeated thoughts and actions that shape the mind and orient a person's life. So in that sense, every mind has a liturgy. The question isn't whether or not you have one or whether you believe in one. It's what your daily thoughts, habits, and attention are training you to become. You're already doing it. One of the great misunderstandings surrounding spirituality is the belief that prayer only occurs when someone folds their hands and directs their attention to God. And again, don't get stuck on the word prayer. Look at the function. What's involved? Well, think about your own life. How many conversations do you have every day that no one else hears? Or that no one else is in the room for? Probably hundreds, probably thousands. It's a seemingly endless internal dialogue. Maybe you replay arguments and conversations from the past, possibly conversations from the future, reliving disasters, victories, regrets, criticisms of yourself. Maybe you're rushing to defend yourself. You narrate your entire day over and over again, telling yourself who you are, because that's what all of this really is. It's a way of giving the organism an identity. We do it through description. Religion calls repeated sacred words a mantra. Psychology calls it self-talk, right? Neuroscience might call it recursive cognition. And again, it's different words, same function. Now ask yourself this question. What phrases do you repeat the most? What ideas, what concepts get repeated? What philosophical point of view gets repeated? This is hard. This is going to be hard. Things are difficult. The world is shit. I need more. I'm anxious. I'm this. I'm that. Well, that's your mantra. That's your prayer. The organism, this body that you inhabit, will organize itself around an expectation. That expectation is the result of repetition. The body gets familiar with this repetition. It learns to expect a certain outcome, a certain point of view, so the mind looks for a way to make that outcome possible. This is why products repeat slogans. That's chanting. This is why political campaigns, media outlets, these influencers repeat talking points. There's your doctrine. Propaganda peddlers, they repeat narratives. That's the dogma. Every mind understands repetition. It requires it. The disagreement is only about what it should be used for. Every single contemplative tradition involves repetition, not because repetition possesses magical properties, but because repetition changes us, whether we intend it to or not, right? Again, don't focus on the definition of prayer or mantra. Look at the function. When I asked my teacher why we repeat these things so many times, he said, that's how long it takes you to remember. Think about that. That's how long it takes you to remember. So when it comes to worship, what is that? Worship is attention over time. Attention through repetition. And it's hard because the word worship has accumulated so much religious baggage that most people stop listening the second they hear the word. Even those who are religious kind of tune out when the topic comes up, especially if you're talking about worship outside of the context of their conditioned religion of birth. So let's set the word aside, okay? And imagine someone tells you they value their family, their kids, their spouse, all of it. And they value it more than anything in the world. But then you examine their life. It doesn't quite look like that. One of my favorite sayings for people is to say, gee, doesn't it feel good to say no bullshit? They spend every waking hour thinking about work or career stuff. Their emotional energy is fed into their status at work. All of their conversations revolve around money. Their plans for life revolve around career advancement, bonuses. So what are they actually devoted to? And sure, I can hear it. Well, someone's got to make the fucking money to pay for the fencing classes, the private tutor, and the vacations, the private school. I hear you. I mean, within your community of like-minded individuals, it'd look really bad if you didn't, Or we could call it your congregation. It'd look weird. Be weird if you didn't worship the same God as the congregation that you're accustomed to. So what we begin to notice is that attention reveals devotion more honestly than words. A great example would be an alcoholic or an addict of some sort. Replace the concept of career-obsessed social climber with the addict. It's the same thing. In fact, let's take the analogy further. Both of these scenarios, career-obsessed corporate social climber and booze-focused drug-obsessed addict, are deeply engaged with the spiritual practice of sacrifice. How many have offered up and sacrificed a relationship with family, their spouse, children, happiness, free time, and they've sacrificed it to this thing that they're devoted to? You don't have to kneel to worship. You just have to organize your life around it. And honestly, your sacrifices reveal it. In this sense, worship is not just some religious behavior. It's an orientation of one's consciousness. Whatever repeatedly captures your attention begins to shape the identity of your subconscious as well as your nervous system. And when those two decide on an identity that is based on repeated actions and focus, it doesn't matter what you do in the conscious mind. The nervous system and the subconscious mind have now decided that that is their identity. And that's a tough one to shake because those two rascals see that identity as an evolutionary requirement, a biological imperative, a life or death necessity. It is their task. And that is a very difficult thing to get rid of because the subconscious mind and the nervous system are required to believe that they are something, and that something is going to be what is focused on and repeated the most. Attention isn't passive. It's a function of that which creates. It decides which neural pathways will survive. It decides what becomes emotionally significant. And it eventually decides what reality feels like. William James, a pioneer of psychology and a philosopher, famously noted that our experience is whatever we agreed to attend to. Noticing that is more spiritually significant than most of us realize. You've heard the saying, energy flows where the attention goes. Now, note that wherever it is that attention goes, identity will follow. Identity grows where attention goes. Now, I'd like to get into something that at times can make some feel uncomfortable, but it's something that those of us that are trying to commit change in our spiritual lives have to take a look at. And it's the idea that people already possess tremendous faith, extreme faith. I usually bring this up when people tell me that they struggle with faith. Now, maybe it's because they believe that they have a control issue, and maybe they believe that they have too much personal responsibility to put faith in something outside of themselves. But let's look at the function of faith. What is it? It's knowing. It's trust in something unseen. If you've ever been doing something where you had to trust your training or the equipment, you know that the outcome will be fine even though you can't see the outcome yet. You believe in what you already know. You believe in your training. You believe in the equipment. Now, when we ask someone broadly whether they have faith, without a certain context, just general faith, their mind typically puts it into a religious context. They will more than likely say no, or they may say that they struggle with it. Now, they say that, but then watch how confidently they will predict these negative outcomes. Notice the certainty, the conviction, the emotional investment. I had an old friend reach out to me the other day. He needed me to do something for him that he couldn't do. So something that I have a lot of expertise in. So I just did it for him. We had some small talk, but in the middle of the usual small talk, he just randomly inserted, I'm good. The world's a trash fire. And I thought it was an odd thing to say. My world isn't a trash fire, far from it. I have a wonderful life. I happen to know that he does too. He really does. But I also know that is his MO. His MO is to focus on the uncontrollable. So if faith simply means living in expectation of something, then fear can potentially become our greatest act of faith. Remember, what the mind perceives, the body will feel. We rehearse disasters that have never even happened. We become so emotionally attached to certain narratives that we experience futures that don't even exist, events that don't exist. Because our nervous system doesn't always know the difference between a vividly imagined catastrophe and an actual catastrophe. We give repeated attention to these things. And what is repeated attention? It's devotion. We become devoted to possibilities that we desperately hope never happen. In other words, a lot of folks spend their entire life praying to their fears. Not on purpose, obviously, but they do it automatically. The mechanism of devotion, prayer, what have you, is functioning exactly as it was designed. The problem in this case isn't that the mechanism exists. The problem is that most of us have never been shown that it is operating. Religion gave these mechanisms names. Psychology and neurology gave them different names. While the human mind has been demonstrating their existence all along, the question has never been whether these forces are real. The question is whether we are directing them consciously or not, or whether they are directing them for us. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about Jung, Carl Jung, and the need to devote. Carl Jung, who I'm a fan of, as opposed to the demented pervert Sigmund Freud, who we got stuck with. Jung made an observation that is impossible to deny. He believed that the religious impulse is not something invented by the culture, but something deeply rooted within the human psyche. I like to imagine it as a bodily function. Religious devotion was not invented by the power structure as a control system, as appealing as it is to the more cynical amongst us. But it was hijacked by the power structure and then turned into a control system. Now, whether you agree with every aspect of Jung's work is not the point. What matters is the question he raises. The question being, what if the desire to devote ourselves to something is built into us? Then what? If so, that would explain why civilizations in every corner of the world developed religion independently. Some sort of a belief system that they were devoted to, different myths, symbols, gods, and beneath all of them, at their core, is the same impulse of the human heart, which is the longing to orient ourselves towards something greater than us. Now, the lazy, modern materialist reductionist culture often assumes that when religion declines, this impulse disappears, but it doesn't. It's kind of low-hanging fruit, but just look around, right? People still seek meaning everywhere. They want something to be true. They want something to be real and objective. They want certainty, though none truly exists. We are wired to belong somewhere. We want a group, a tribe. People still seek something or someone that tells them who they are and how to live. So it never goes away, but the object of faith or devotion just changes. So if someone no longer worships God or never did, they may worship success. And if not success, they'll worship politics. If not politics, wealth. If not wealth, status. Now, when I said wealth and politics, you probably thought that I meant positively. Your negative inclination towards wealth or people that have wealth or people in politics is also a method of worship. Maybe they just want the approval of strangers, or maybe even their family, their children, spouse. The point is not that these things are evil. The point is that the mind naturally organizes itself around something. It orientates towards devotion. The center of a person's world may change, but the mechanism does not. So maybe a deeper question that we can ask ourselves is not, do I worship? The question is, what occupies the center of my life? Because whatever occupies the center will begin to define everything else. I guess the easiest place to see this is, again, in addiction, because addiction reveals the mechanism. One of the reasons this topic fascinates me is because I work with people dealing with addiction. And if you spend enough time around addiction, you begin to notice something. You notice that it isn't about substances, it's about devotion. Think about what addiction asks of a person. It asks for attention, time, sacrifice. It wants loyalty, it wants repetition. And like a god or a religion, it offers relief, peace, some kind of fulfillment. And doesn't that sound oddly familiar? Because these are the very qualities that religions have traditionally associated with worship. Again, don't get caught in the religious language. Look at the function. Addiction becomes the organizing principle in a person's life. Everything begins orbiting around it. Their relationships, finances, identity, the addict's health, their purpose. Essentially, their life revolves around it. The person isn't just using a substance and getting high or drunk. Their consciousness, their mind, their nervous system has become organized around it. Now, zoom out. If this mechanism will attach itself to drugs, alcohol, porn, shopping, why wouldn't it attach itself to outrage, political identity, fame, being productive, fear, victimhood? See, the mechanism doesn't care, it just attaches. I believe addiction can teach us something important about human nature. It can reveal to us the architecture of devotion. Now, when I mention addiction, outrage, political identity, and victimhood as objects of devotion, which really just boils down to repeated attention, it brings to mind the archonic model. This is where I'd like to bring something from the previous episode to mind. And if you didn't listen to episode 233, please do so. But I'd like to reintroduce an idea from the Gnostic Christian tradition. So in the last episode, I discussed the archons, the rulers of the lower realms that use confusion and chaos to control human consciousness, to confine it. All brought to you by Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, the false creator god, and yes, that is early Christian cosmology. So in the early traditional Christ-based movements, before the canonization of the Bible by Emperor Constantine in the First Council of Nicaea, in an effort to centralize power, there was no devil, no Satan, no demons, none of that. Those are creations of the power structure. But before that, there were the archons, again, using chaos, confusion to confine consciousness. Addiction, outrage, political identity, victimhood, do they create less chaos in one's life? Right? Like you develop a political identity, right, left, conservative, liberal, and now your life is less chaotic? Is there less confusion, less separation? No, they fucking create more. Now, whether you understand the archons as actual beings that exist in some other dimension, or as a metaphor for the nature of power structures or psychological forces or control systems, the framework is very interesting. Because the archons do not create consciousness, they redirect it. They don't eliminate it or get rid of devotion, right? They misdirect it, they confuse it. So think about this. The organism, this being that the soul inhabits, this thing that some of you think is quote unquote you, It is organized around expectation, right? The mind doesn't care about truth, it cares about repetition. So the organism is organized around expectation based on repetition. What you repeat, the body, the mind, whatever, will begin to expect it. And what's the mind's job? Well, the mind's job is to find a way to make the expectation possible. Now, if we go with Jung and his belief that human beings are naturally wired for devotion, naturally wired to organize themselves around something and then elevate that thing to a sacred position in their life, or at least to a central position in their life, then the most effective control system wouldn't be to destroy that instinct. You couldn't. You can't destroy it. The most effective control system would be to offer endless substitutes or options. Because think about it. If you know that the human has an innate desire almost at the level of a bodily function to devote themselves to something, then you've got them. You also know that they will sacrifice family, connection, love, and their children to the thing that holds that central place in their life. The human will sacrifice. They will offer up the things that will actually bring them contentment and peace. Like I said in the last episode, we do it to ourselves. It's very easy. So that central thing, the God, could be your career, your political party, your religion, drugs, alcohol, your favorite team, the game on Sunday, celebrity culture, Hollywood, success, influence, unhealthy relationships. And what are you offering up or letting go of in service of these things? Nothing? Are you sure? Let me ask it this way. What do you neglect while placing repeated attention on those things? Do you stop talking to your family because they don't like the politician that you voted for that would absolutely step over the fucking bodies of you and everyone you love to maintain control and save themselves? Do you argue with someone close to you because they don't like the group of overpaid athletes that you like? Maybe they don't talk to God the way you talk to God. They put a different hat on the mystery than you do. See, you can't kill God, and you can't kill the innate desire for devotion, but you can, as a power structure, play to the lowest energetic forces within a human and offer up substitutes. So instead of truth and wisdom from leadership, from the media, from our cultural tastemakers, we get distraction, we get confusion and chaos and false gods. I mentioned this in that previous episode, episode 233, and I'll obviously need to do a whole episode on this as well, but this is the Pistis Sophia. This is the story of wisdom itself reaching toward a false light in search of truth, only to become trapped in a lower archonic realm where it's confined by confusion and chaos. Wisdom is trapped in confusion and chaos, unable to realize itself. Wisdom unable to realize itself. Imagine a lotus flower in the darkest mud. The seed wakes up and it comes through the mud and the shit and through the water finally to get to sunlight. That is the importance of the lotus as a symbol. The importance of Padme in Sanskrit. It is that. It is wisdom freeing itself from confusion and chaos. So when we look at the function of things like distraction, information overload, external validation, perpetual outrage, or these false tribal identities, and not the actual content of these things, what we actually see is a control system. In other words, let's say you have two people arguing over current events, the news. They're arguing over which multi-million-dollar talking head CIA cutout for Project Mockingbird is telling them the truth, when telling the truth is not the intention. You see, the function is to create confusion, chaos, and separation. It's a control system, not a news organization. When people talk about Project Mockingbird, they believe that it's about propagating disinformation. Maybe that's part of it. But I don't believe that's the full function of the PSYOP. The desired effect isn't the confused feeling you might feel while ingesting this disinformation. The fighting with friends and family is the desired outcome. They keep them fragmented, confused, fearful, worried, fighting. Notice something. None of these require force. No chains, prisons, no dictators standing over your shoulder, only redirection. Think of these flock cameras. The constant surveillance is bad enough, but that's not really how they'll truly control us. It's the feeling we get from being constantly monitored that will weaken us, soften us, and make us more pliable. By the way, I have a t-shirt on my site, and it says their plan to weaken us has served to awaken us. So feels appropriate. Go there, check it out. So we're basically living in the most sophisticated prison in the world. And from the Gnostic perspective, that prison happens to be the entire world. In other words, the human experience. The planet, the human body. According to the Gnostic Christian cosmology, it was designed by Yaldabaoth and maintained by the Archons. So essentially, we're not in this predicament because we're incapable of choosing. We're in it because we have no choice. And just to be clear, I'm not fully bought in on the Gnostic Christian point of view, but I do find it interesting enough to look at it closely. So if the Gnostics were correct, even if it was only symbolically, which I can buy into, the archonic system does not succeed by turning people evil. It succeeds by keeping them busy. And it seems to me that those with the weakest constitution become engaged fully in the chasing, consuming, comparing, fearing, reacting, identifying, and repeating. A consciousness that never becomes still is extraordinarily easy to influence. Not because it lacks intelligence, but because it never has the opportunity to observe itself. There's no space. When there's space between stimulus and response, then there is a chance for what's called metacognition. In other words, to think about our thoughts. Not ruminating, but thoughtfully considering the thoughts that arise in the mind. Otherwise, we are beholden to the feelings in the body. We're led by the flesh. We are a slave to the senses at that point. This is why nearly every contemplative tradition places such an emphasis on silence, on meditation, prayer, stillness. Not because silence is inherently holy, it's not, it just is, but because silence interrupts the machinery. It creates enough space to ask a question that most people rarely ask. Whose voice have I been listening to? Or an even better question would be, is this thought actually mine? Now, to continue making my point, I'd like to point out that even the most self-proclaimed, hard-nosed realists are already practicing. They're engaged in devotion, they're engaged in worship, and I'm not trying to be cute or funny, I'm being serious. Because if you've followed along this far, then you've noticed something. None of these mechanisms require belief in order to function. You don't have to believe in mantras for your thoughts to be repeated and for that to work. You don't have to believe in prayer for your inner dialogue to shape your mind's perception, to shape its judgment, or any of the other cognitive faculties. You don't have to believe in worshiping something in order for your life to be organized around the thing that you're repeatedly giving all of your attention to. You don't have to believe in faith for your expectations to influence your experience. These are not primarily religious activities. They are human activities. Religion did not invent them. Religion didn't invent repetition or repeated attention. Religion observed them. Psychology observed these things as did neuroscience. Now, again, the names are different, but the functions are the same. And noticing this really changed something for me. It allowed me to see function without getting lost in the rest of it, which then brought me back to the rest of it, the importance of prayer and mantras. Questions or debates about whether or not meditation is a spiritual act, or if prayer is a psychological phenomenon, or if mantras are spiritual. These questions create arguments that are distractions that lead us away from the actual usefulness of the functions that these practices provide. And I think that is intentional. I think it's on purpose. Remember what I said at the beginning. Wrapping something real in something ludicrous. So what's the function? Well, let's look at what the mantra does. Mantra, meaning mind protection or mind tool in Sanskrit, is essentially a cognitive recentering device that protects the mind against anything that is not the mantra. It's a way to remember. So in the Vaishnava, or what's commonly referred to as the Hare Krishna tradition, the Maha Mantra is what keeps the mind fixed on Krishna and always remembering Krishna, remembering God. Think about it. What's the hardest part about change? Whether it's a diet or spirituality, the biggest obstacle is remembering that you're doing something different. The mantra protects the mind. It reminds the mind to think, in this case, of God, which is also reminding the body of the mantra. Well, if a person repeats the same fearful ideas or negative ideas thousands of times a day, their nervous system will organize around that expectation. They will be protecting their mind against anything that is not fearful or negative. But if another person repeats a sentence of courage thousands of times a day, something positive, their nervous system, their mind will organize around that expectation. What the mind perceives, the body will feel. So the function of the mantra isn't relying on whether the sentence or the idea came from a church, a guru, a therapist, or some neuroscientist. It's all repetition. The mind simply responds to repetition. The same is true of the function of devotion, which is basically repeated attention. The machinery is already running. The function is already there. Now, the only real question is whether you are participating consciously or unconsciously. Are you thoughtlessly engaged in a devotional practice that's deity is something that will create more confusion and chaos, or a mantra practice that is a thoughtless repetition of some negative idea that's probably not even yours? Is that what you're doing? Are you consciously participating or not? Because when we begin to consciously participate, we begin to access a hidden power that a lot of people tend to overlook. I believe most people unintentionally prove the very thing that they are denying or dismissing in this case. For instance, when someone tells me that they don't believe that mantras or that any of this other stuff works, but then you see that they've spent 20 years repeating the same horrible messaging that keeps them stuck and depressed and essentially in such a negative state that prevents them from having the imagination or playfulness with life that allows this stuff to work. It's interesting. Sad, really. Someone says they don't believe in prayer, but they spend every day just vividly imagining everything that could go wrong and every horrible thing they've experienced in the past. I mean, due to my social circles and my formidable years, I know the saddest, most negative, boo-hoo, crybaby motherfuckers you have ever fucking met in your entire life. And friends, if you are listening to this and you're one of them, I mean that. I love you, but for fuck's sake, where some people in that punk and hardcore scene went the route of positivity and all that, my circle went the other goddamn direction. And to this day have not changed. You see it in their social media. It's all these sad ass bullshit where they're sharing some fucking depressing meme that's supposed to be funny, right? There's no pictures of them enjoying life, just them pushing these horrible crybaby narratives about how hard life is. They're like a walking Kathy cartoon. And if you don't know who Kathy is, it's a comic strip. She was this sad, complaining, insufferable female version of Charlie Brown with an office job. Charlie Brown without the fun. Anyway, people that are engaging with the world in this way are just emotionally rehearsing all of the negativity that they can imagine. They don't realize it, but their nervous system is constantly reacting to this stuff, and now it's expecting it. Remember, the organism is organized around expectation. What the mind perceives, the body will feel. And if you're part of a power structure and you're interested in control, boy, this is a lot easier than you thought it was going to be. They've become devotees. They're believers. They have mantras, prayers, rituals. They're very dedicated practitioners and are devoted to their view of things, and their nervous system, their subconscious mind, hell, even their conscious mind are following suit. And of course, they'll talk about their open-mindedness and how open-minded they are. But what is faith without works, right? What is belief without action? It's dead. You act like a negative fuck with your open-mindedness. Guess what's not happening? Your open-mindedness. Open to possibilities. You know what I mean? But all their decisions become shaped by an imaginary future that has never even happened. I've fallen victim to this, or worse, a future that's shaped by past experiences. Why? Because it's their mind's job to find a way to make that expectation that is due to repeated past actions possible. So what is that if not a form of prayer, a form of devotion, all directed towards some fucking negative outcome? Forget the religious overlay and look at the function of repeated attention. Because if faith without works is dead, then faith with works means the organism will organize around it. The mind will find a way to make it possible and continually find a way to recreate whatever the mind has placed its faith in, for better or worse. So what we see is that while people might reject spiritual practices, they are unknowingly performing them all day long. And it's not because they're foolish. It's because no one ever pointed out the function. Because anyone talking to them about prayer or religious practice was probably acting like a lunatic. And look, I deal with this all day long. I believe that there is a God. I have a mask that I put on the mystery that works for me, a way that my mind can understand things. All that aside, I do understand that when I talk with non-believing adults about it, that I am essentially asking a grown-up to develop a relationship with an imaginary friend. Now, what do I say to someone that wants that imaginary friend, but just doesn't know how to cultivate that relationship? I don't know. I really don't know. I guess you just huff and puff and see what happens. Find a system and dedicate yourself to it. But I will say this. If you're seeking God, don't seek it through a transaction. In other words, looking at this through the lens of, if I'm a good boy or a good girl, will you make sure that I have an easy time and grant my wishes? Because that's essentially what a lot of people are doing. It's why you see people in rehabs and prisons become overnight evangelists. They don't catch the spirit, they just got scared. This is why, this is their Hail Mary, right? If I stop being an asshole and I force this on everyone around me, will God love me and stop making the world so hard for me? It's not out of love for God. It's out of fear of consequences. Why? Because that's how we think in America. It's all a fucking transaction. Not to digress too far, but anyway, so the problem has never been that these things don't work. The problem is that we've been engaged with them unconsciously. We've been using the power of these practices to shoot ourselves in the foot. So where does all this leave us, right? What do we do with that? Well, if what we're talking about here is true, and I tend to think that it is, then the solution isn't to become more religious, nor is it to become less religious. The solution is to become more conscious, to become aware, maybe to observe, to notice, to think about our thoughts rather than simply responding to everything that pops into the mind. I mean, what if we began to notice what it is that holds the central place in our psychological world? To notice what receives devotion. Not what we'd like to be devoted to, but what we actually devote to. And when that thing receives our time, our energy and devotion, what is not receiving our time, our energy, or our devotion? The moment one thing has your attention, something else or someone else does not. So if we're going to place our attention, especially our repeated attention, then we need to be absolutely sure that it's not going to be wasted or used for evil. The machinery, the function of these things like prayer and devotion are always running in the background of our lives. And we have got to be aware of it, right? The functions that we are unaware of will control us. If we are unaware of what's happening in the unconscious, then it will run our lives. However, once we see it, once we understand it, it becomes something that we consciously direct rather than being unconsciously directed by it. The machinery that once controlled you becomes something that you can consciously direct. And really, we don't have much of a choice here. We simply have to learn to guide and steer things like prayer and devotion. We have to understand their function, because devotion cannot just be removed from the equation. Because once you realize that everything I've discussed is true, you'll recognize something very important. You'll recognize that the answer is not to stop being devoted. The answer is to become devoted to something worthy of devotion. I mean, for years, I believed freedom meant being attached to nothing, letting go of everything. But I don't think that's true anymore. Because I believe that we seek orientation. We desire to be devoted. We seek meaning outside of ourselves. And what I think that is us seeking God, whether we find it in nature, a church, a temple, statue, the eyes of the ones that love us the most. That's neither here nor there. The point is that we will devote ourselves to something. We have to respect the fact, that fact of the aspect of our human consciousness, and be sure that we are devoting ourselves to things that are worthy of devotion and praying in a way that is meaningful and in the direction of truth. The mistake is not the act of devotion itself. The mistake is in the unconscious direction of devotion, right? Directing it towards things that can't satisfy it. There is no amount of money that ever says enough, right? There's no amount of status that will ever finally say, you're complete now, it's okay, right? There's no political victory that permanently removes the conflict and fixes the problems. In fact, these things only ask for more and more and more. And I believe that is one of the characteristics of the false god. It continually demands sacrifice while never offering fulfillment. And replace the word God with whatever you like. Just look at it functionally. In other words, if the thing, person, place, or otherwise, sitting at the center of your psychological world, the thing that you've elevated to the central place in your life is not giving fulfillment, then is it true? Is it right? Is it creating confusion? Is it creating separation? If so, it may be archonic in that it is confining your consciousness. It's not enriching you, it's torturing you. Now, as for things like truth, love, and wisdom, they all behave quite differently. And more deeply we pursue them, the more they expand our lives instead of consuming us. They enrich us, right? It's why all of the great spiritual traditions, despite their differences, always point towards similar qualities of compassion, humility, love, not because these are moralistic or legislative rules imposed by some outside power structure, but because they naturally emerge when consciousness is oriented towards what is real. If the thing at the center of your world does not bring about things like love, compassion, truth, deep truth, real truth, things you feel in your soul, then for my money, it's a product of what would be called the archons, the rulers of the lower realm, whether you call it God, the higher self, Brahman, Krishna, whatever. The label matters much less than the function or the direction. Because at the end of the day, every human life becomes an expression of whatever sits at its center. So maybe real freedom is not to worship nothing like some petulant, know-it-all, atheistic college freshman, but maybe true freedom is to finally become conscious enough to decide where your devotion goes. So to start wrapping this up, when people hear the phrase hidden forces or the occult, they think of some secret organization, government organization, some invisible beings manipulating the world. And maybe those things exist, or maybe they don't. I don't know. They're a fucking secret. But I do know this. Anything that manipulates, inverts, or confuses, anything that makes things feel chaotic, anything that separates us from each other, separates us from our compassionate nature, from our spiritual identity as soul, tends to use our attention to exist. It counts on our participation. It requires us to engage in repetition. It requires expectation and devotion to manifest in our world. Things that require relevance in order to be in the world tend to require attention and repetition. Things that require relevance tend to be vampiric, meaning that we invite them in and then they take from us. They take our time, our attention. And if they have our time and attention, we have to look at what doesn't have our time and our attention. God, family, our spirit. So look at what things in our culture require relevancy in order to exist. Celebrity, politicians, activists. Celebrity is only relevant if our lives are lacking. People don't binge watch some garbage shit on TV if they have more fulfilling things to do. Politicians need us scared and lacking enough to believe that they will help us, that they will give us the things that we're missing: money, jobs, lower prices, protection from these manufactured evils. And then there's activists. If you're not oppressed, if you're not a victim, if you're not outraged, then they don't really have a purpose. You should always be cautious of someone who is continually pointing out problems without offering real actionable solutions. And that goes for your therapist too, by the way. But these things, repetition, attention, they shape human lives every day, all day, whether we recognize it or not, and whether we look at it through the lens of neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, or religion. The influence of something like repeated attention is undeniable. That's why I believe that the real battlefield is not first in politics, media, or culture. I believe it's within consciousness, what holds our attention repeatedly, because whoever directs your attention directs your perception. Whoever directs your perception shapes your identity, your experience. Your perception is your experience. Your experience is your reality. And it should be controlled by you. Now, if the Gnostics were correct, then this is exactly how an archonic system would operate. It wouldn't work through force. It would hijack our propensity for devotion. And it wouldn't do it by taking away freedom. It would do it by softly, quietly, and gradually persuading you to give it away. And whether you accept that framework or not doesn't matter. The lesson's the same. Your inner dialogue is a prayer that will be answered, in that it will shape your perception, and your mind will find a way to make it possible. And the other thing I want you to remember is the thing that holds a central place in your life is exactly the thing that you are devoted to. So it is very important that you stay conscious of where your devotion goes. I love you. Stay awake. If the infinite spark of being has brought you any value, consider supporting the work. And you can do that by checking out Awake and the 90-Day Transformation Journal, both now available on Amazon. The links are in the description. If you want to support this work on a monthly basis, there are $10, $15, and $20 Patreon tiers that have no locked content yet, just support. You can also swing by the website, check out the merch store, learn more about working with me one-on-one, and as always, the YouTube page has full episodes as well as binaural beats to help you with your practice. So I'll see you next week. Thank you, and I love you.